what I'm really looking for is that number. She has suggested $62 million shortfall. Would you agree with that number?
What I would say is this is a positive measure. This is a really positive measure. This is a really positive measure.
Who do you think you're talking to?
Since we first broke the news on Friday night that the sales tax holiday was nothing more than smoke and mirrors, we thought we would go back and cover Chrystia Freeland testifying at the Senate Finance Committee. It was, in the words of the Globe and Mail, quote, in short, a disaster, end quote.
Let's take a look.
Let's start. Questions with Senator Forêt. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being here. This bill's goal is good, but as you know, with any strategy, we need to have the right target when it comes to Canadians that are affected by a measure. In terms of goals, what do you think would be the income range for Canadians? Everyone who goes to the grocery store or that wants to go to a restaurant over the holidays, anyone who wants to buy something for children and grandchildren, this measure affects all Canadians. I think that there is a problem if we think about food banks that are overused and a lot of people that are in a very fragile economic situation. It is very clear that these people cannot go to the restaurant. They don't have a PlayStation, for example. So it would be a measure that would benefit to middle and upper middle class. So do you have a measure in place for more vulnerable families? For example, why not remove the tax on heating?
Good question.
So this is interesting, folks, because there's a couple of different quote-unquote groups in the Senate now. It used to just be Liberal senators and Conservative senators. Why? Because senators are typically only appointed by the Prime Minister, and the Prime Ministers would appoint senators that align to their ideology, right? So when a Liberal Prime Minister is in power, they would usually, they would promote or appoint Liberal senators, and then when a Conservative is Prime Minister, they will appoint Conservative senators. Now, Justin Trudeau tried this smoke and mirrors crap where he said, I'm going to be the first Prime Minister to make an independent Senate. Okay, sure.
Well, it backfired spectacularly on him, didn't it?
Well, it has, as we've kind of seen. But what he ended up doing was he had committees that were convened in order to recommend appointments to the Senate. These committees were made entirely up of Liberals. So yeah, they're independent, yet they're only going to be recommending Liberal candidates to be appointed to the Senate.
But it really didn't work out in his favor, because instead of having like a government Senate, the Liberals, and then an opposition Senate, the Conservatives, he's created these other groups, these independent groups, and they just kind of oppose whatever they feel like opposing. So even if the Liberals are putting forward something, they'll oppose it.
Well, it all depends, right? Because so one of those groups is called the Independent Senators Group, and they are not part of the Liberal caucus. But the funny thing is the Liberal leader in the Senate, he's the guy that's essentially the the head of the Liberal Senate caucus, just like Don Plett is the head of the Conservative Senate caucus. I guess there were some occasions recently where that leader went to the meetings of these other senator groups and said, don't forget who appointed you. So it's like, okay, so your whole grand experiment of these independent Senate groups is not really going well because they don't have to do, according to you, what the Liberal caucus says because they don't report into them. So they have their own little mini caucus, and no doubt they kind of like it that they don't have to report into the Liberals. And it's actually caused the Senate to be completely bogged down because they can't agree on what bills they want to discuss and when they're going to do it and all of this stuff.
We have, though, heard that in general, the Senate is much less partisan than the House of Commons. So that makes the work a little bit easier. But
well, and I think this kind of also gives some hope that these senators aren't just going to oppose conservative legislation just because of Justin Trudeau. That's kind of what we've seen. And that's kind of what we heard from Senator Leo Housakos, and that's kind of what we heard from Senator Don Plett, that they're confident that the, call it, cooler minds of the Senate will prevail. And we're kind of seeing it because they're not even doing what Justin Trudeau wants them to do. So this is, frankly, it's quite interesting. And why I call your attention to this is because the first person who's questioning Freeland in this is one of these Liberal Justin Trudeau appointed senators. And he's saying, what's the point of this? Like,
right.
What is the point?
It's only going to benefit the middle class and the upper middle class, which, I mean, you could argue we don't even have a middle class anymore.
Well, and the Liberals are like, well, you know, you can go to a restaurant. Well, if you can afford it.
Right.
And that's what this senator is actually saying. Like, it's some good common sense stuff. Like, the only people that are going to be going to restaurants en masse are going to be people that can afford it.
Well, and it was crazy. Like, for example, when we were on our drive home from Ottawa, we stopped at a fast food joint and we spent almost $40 on burgers and fries. Like, it's nuts. How can the average family afford that, like, regularly? We did it because we were on the road, but like, just the price to eat out is outrageous.
Yeah, you used to be able to get a combo from McDonald's for under $10. Not anymore.
I understand your question. I have a lot of empathy, and I understand your worries about more vulnerable Canadians. This measure will help all Canadians, including the most vulnerable Canadians. It will help everyone in this country that want to get gloves for their children, for example. It will help every grandmother that might want to buy a cake at the grocery store for the children over the holidays. But I do agree that we need to have targeted measures to help the most vulnerable. One of our priorities from the start was to implement target measures for the most vulnerable people. We have done a lot. We have, for example, dental care that allows seniors to go see a dentist. Same thing for children. This measure will change lives for the most vulnerable people. There are also targeted measures for families. These measures are targeted to families in needs. And there are a lot of measures that could be mentioned, but I see you have another question.
So if you find yourself talking about everything else but what you're at committee to talk about, you're probably not doing very well.
Definitely not doing very well.
So, and if you're trying to actually point to dental care as something that is an example of how you're helping quote unquote vulnerable people, when from what we've heard, the dental care only really covers maybe 20%, if that, of your total bill, which is probably a shock to people, because typically you go into the dentist and they say, "Hi, I'm here for my appointment." Then you sit down, then they call you in, they do everything, then you go out and they say, "Hi, here's your bill."
Yeah, if you think that it's free going in, because that's what the Liberals and the NDP have been calling it, free dental care, and you get a bill at the end that you're not prepared for, what are you going to do?
Right. So all this has really done is give people anxiety and probably make them pay money that they didn't have in the first place. So you're talking about the dental care and you're talking about all this other stuff. He's asking you about your GST bill, Freeland. Remember the one that you disagreed with Justin Trudeau about? Remember the one that was kind of tied to the $250 check? The one that allegedly you disagree with Justin Trudeau about, which is why you might get fired next week? Yeah, that one.
Well, the thing I find most amusing is that she's trying to treat the senators like they are constituents that are ready to listen to her talking points. Oh, well, the GST might help this group of people, but the dental care, it's going to help this group of people. I can guarantee you the senators don't care about dental care right now because that's not what they're talking about right now.
Yeah, nobody in that room cares, whether they're liberal or not. They don't care.
Do I still have time, Mr. Chair? 50 seconds. I agree that there were measures implemented, but if we look at this measure, I think it will benefit more to the middle class amongst. But what would be your measure for the most vulnerable? This measure will help more vulnerable people. You are right. This measure will also help middle class families. This is also a good thing because all Canadians, including middle class Canadians, need a little bit of support.
Right, but the argument here is that the things that you have excluded from the GST or HST in this bill are mainly going to benefit people in the middle class because those are the people who can afford it.
Right. There's many families out there, and it's heartbreaking at this time of year that their kids are going to wake up on Christmas Day and there's not going to be much under the tree, if anything, because nobody has any money because of this Liberal government.
Right.
So this is essentially the crux of this senator's question, and it's a great question. He's essentially saying, listen, lady, you're saying you're taking the tax off. You're taking the GST and HST off so people can go to a restaurant, so people can buy all these toys for their kids.
So people can get catering. Like, I really don't know many people, if any, who get catering, right? I mean, maybe if you're throwing a corporate event, but like, how many families do you know that are like, oh, let's have a meal catered?
Last night, Dan Kelly, one of our witnesses, president of the CFIB, told our committee, quote, "Not one business will get this right," end of quote, due to the complexity and logistical challenges posed by the policy. Businesses face high compliance costs, tight timelines, and confusion over the eligibility criteria for exempt goods. These challenges disproportionately affect small businesses. Question, given the widespread logistical and compliance issues raised by SMEs, what measures is the government taking to ensure that businesses, particularly small enterprises, receive the support and guidance they need to implement this policy effectively and without undue financial burden? Like the basic line was, we've only got 10 or 12 days to implement this. It's an unrealistic expectation, despite the good nature of the bill.
So thank you very much for the question. And I have a great deal of respect for Dan Kelly. My office works with him closely, and I do too, and I've talked with him about this. I also have a great deal of sympathy, as I think we all should, for the challenges of running a small business. And, the government is available to provide guidance and support. One of the reasons I hope the Senate, and I'm grateful to the Senate for acting with alacrity on this measure, is to give businesses certainty. I do want to say that we have been hearing publicly from many businesses who are delighted by the measure. And I'm just going to quote Kelly Higson, who's the president and CEO of Restaurants Canada. And she said, I quote, "This is a big win for the restaurant industry and comes after months of relentless advocacy. We also appreciate that the relief will be extended over January, which is typically the lowest time of the year for our industry, and right through to Valentine's Day." The Retail Council of Canada was similarly totally enthusiastic. And I'm going to quote them again, "The RCC has held multiple discussions with the Federal Department of Finance on GST holiday measures." Mio and I can confirm that is the case, with successful advocacy on several specific points, and more generally persuading finance and the CRA to take a flexible, common sense approach to putting the policy into practice. So I have a lot of sympathy for the challenges of small businesses every single day, including with this measure. But I also want to assure senators that we have worked closely with business representatives in putting this together. And we have heard, there is in the public domain, a lot of very positive feedback.
Did you hear that? Advocacy.
Well,
What's that code for?
it's code for lobbying. And I find it very, let's just say, disingenuous that she says, well, we've heard, from a lot of businesses that there's very positive feedback out there. And then she goes on to quote somebody from CEO of Restaurants Canada. And we've been advocating for this for months. And then the Retail Council of Canada. Okay, so these aren't businesses, Freeland.
No, these sound like lobby groups.
Yeah. Sounds a lot like lobby groups. And she was even kind of giggling about the fact that they were, having lots of meetings with her. So that's very interesting. What's also interesting is she says, well, there's a lot of positive. No, there's not. There's not a lot of positive feedback about this. And there was reports on the news today. CP24 did one. I think CTV did one. And businesses are like, I got nothing. There was like one grocery store that I think CP24 was obviously doing a plug for, and I'm not sure what they were getting in return for that, but they're like, oh yeah, they love the measure, and they're in favor of future measures like this in the future. I'm sure they are.
Yeah.
So it's obvious that was a plant or a plug, but most of the other more objective reports on this is the business owners were like, look at this. Is this for an adult? Is this for a child? It can be used by both. Is this exempt? I don't know. And we can't even get our POS system set up properly.
Right. Michelle Ferrari actually just posted something I saw on Facebook. If you give me 2 seconds, I'll pull it up here. So here's something I found on Michelle Ferrari's Facebook. It's a photo of a sign. It says, "Attention customers. Due to problems finding someone who can reprogram our inventory system with the confusing GST rules being implemented this month, we will be charging taxes on items as before. Apologies for any inconvenience. Please keep your receipts and submit them to the Federal CRA GST department," and then provides a phone number on how you can reach the CRA's GST department. It says, "Thank you, management."
So this just goes along with what we were kind of saying the other day, which is because of all the problems that the businesses were having, the federal government probably realized that they're going to have a harder time enforcing this than they were for CERB and the CEBA loans during COVID. So they just said, well, it would be great if you can do it, but we understand if you don't. And then they put all of this back onto the customers. So they're like, okay, well, you can still collect it. You just have to do all the work. It's insane. And also, what some lobby groups can say, see, we got this done. Like, give me a freaking break. You know, the thing for the restaurants is they can take, like, it's easy for them because GST and HST just comes off everything. It's easy for them. Nothing's excluded because it's all food.
That we know of. I mean, what about grocery stores that sell things like soap, right? That has HST on it.
Well, grocery stores are also not restaurants. So, you know, that's where the grocery stores are going to have a more difficult time, especially stores like Walmart, where they have to go through and
item by
manage the individual
item.
stores. Yeah.
Right.
So it's obvious where this came from, folks. The restaurants think they're going to, you know,
Cash in,
but
really.
as I think you asked the average Canadian, are they going to be going out to more restaurants because there's no tax? Probably not.
Well, it seems like this whole thing came about that the restaurants noticed that they had less business because Canadians have less money. And also the Retail Council discovered the same thing, that people are not buying non-essential items. So it seems to me like maybe they advocated to have this put in place.
Or, you know, lobbied.
Supplementary?
Yes.
How does the government plan to address the disproportionate impact of compliance costs? Because that was the big critique that we received last night, and from the various witnesses who gave us percentages of 60, 70, 80%, questioning not necessarily the thought behind the program, but the execution by the government. So I guess, what can you tell us, will the government plan, how will they address the disproportionate impact of compliance costs and administration burdens on smaller businesses compared to larger corporations, so that there's fair treatment for everyone, and that when someone goes, oops, we made a mistake, the Canadian Revenue Agency is not going to jump on it and penalize people, because there is a time issue here that has to be respected.
Look, I think it's a very good question, and I think it's very important for all of us to be sensitive to the real challenges of running a small business.
So that's rich coming from Freeland. Oh, well, you know, we need to be sensitive to how challenging it can be to run a small business. Sensitive. So this committee meeting was just this past week, folks, and the Senate only voted that this was going to be into law. I believe it was Thursday night.
And we only found out Friday night, a mere 6 hours before this was going to go into effect, that small businesses don't actually have to do this with their POS systems, that customers can still be charged the GST or HST and then submit it to the CRA.
Right. Yet no mainstream media is essentially communicating this. The only one that I actually saw that even mentioned this is because they were talking to the Canadian Independent Business Federation. So, like, that's it. No one is reporting on this for some reason. But, oh, wait, they're on the Liberal payroll. I forgot. Silly me. So, but this is the thing. She's so sensitive to these businesses. She gave them no time to do it whatsoever. There's no support for these businesses. There's nothing for them to, like, double check to see, you know, how do I know if this applies or not? It's a complete joke.
Our government certainly is. We see small businesses as the heart of our communities and the heart of our economy. Officials have definitely been working with small business on these measures. We're going to continue to do that. And your advice, Senator, that a very positive, sympathetic attitude be taken at all stages of this is advice that I strongly agree with.
A strong, sympathetic attitude? Tell that to the cashiers that are going to be dealing with pissed off customers because they're still getting charged tax. Like, it's not going to be the cashier's fault. And these cashiers, many of them, are probably going to leave the day in tears because of dealing with all of these customers. And it's not the customer's fault either. It's the government's fault because they didn't communicate this at all.
Are you surprised, though, unfortunately?
Oh, I'm not surprised, but it's just, like, it's a joke.
the government comes up with these harebrained ideas and then does like some half-baked implementation, expects everybody else to fill in the blanks, like the customers and the employees and the store owners, and they want all of the glory.
Well, just look at the child care program. They basically they put these crap bills together, and then they expect everybody else to do all the work and to figure it out. And then when it doesn't work, they say, well, it's not our fault. That's the province's fault. That's the daycare's fault. And meanwhile, these businesses are losing hundreds, if not thousands of dollars trying to actually put this in place. And then when they finally do, they find out afterwards, oh, by the way, you didn't have to do that anyway. So you spent your thousands of dollars for nothing, but thank you very much for that. And those that don't, and their employees get yelled at all day, your response is, well, we have a strong sympathetic attitude.
Thanks.
Thank you, Minister, for being here. I'm from New Brunswick, so that's one of those provinces where the provincial portion of HST is actually the larger portion. So there's been all kinds of reports in the media, but I guess this wasn't planned for at a provincial level, so I'm just wondering what you're thinking of in terms of being able to make sure that the province does not lose the amount, whether it's 63 million or what the amount is of revenue that they weren't anticipating being without. Can you comment on what types of things you and the provinces are doing?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I have had a number of conversations with Premier Holt, the newly elected Premier of New Brunswick, and congratulations to her. If I may say, great to see a woman Premier. What the conversations we have had with New Brunswick, like the conversations we've had with provinces like Ontario, Newfoundland and Labrador, PEI, have been to say this is a really positive measure. This is a positive measure for all Canadians, and it's a positive measure for the people in your province. And so we have been encouraging provinces to recognize now is the right time across the country, with inflation in the Bank of Canada's target range for 10 months, with interest rates coming down. Now is the right time for all of us to proactively take that step and to say, yeah, let's do this and let's help the people of our province. And we've had very positive conversations with a number of provinces, including New Brunswick.
Okay, so the question was essentially, for provinces that have a harmonized sales tax, which is GST, goes to the government, and a provincial sales tax, goes to the province, what are you going to do with these provinces that weren't anticipating that revenue was going to go missing? What are you going to do for the provinces? And Freeland's answer is, well, this is a good thing, and you should just count on not getting that revenue. That's basically what her answer is.
I don't even want to know what they're losing in Ontario over this.
Lots.
Yeah.
Lots.
Yeah,
of
because
money.
the PST portion of the HST is 8%. So that's a lot of money.
Well, I know Ford had said, oh, this is a great idea, but Ford is about to call an early election, so he's not about to do anything that's going to sacrifice any kind of public opinion.
Yeah, and Ford is like liberal light anyways. He's not a true conservative.
Yeah.
Next question, Senator Ross.
Chair. Thank you for being here with us today, Minister. I'd like to follow up on Senator Kingston's question. Have there been any preliminary calculations prior to the tabling of the bill of what the actual cost will be to New Brunswick? And if there weren't any calculations done in advance, have there been since? And could we get that data?
Of course, we have been thoughtful about that, and I really do want to emphasize, I have personally had a number, I'm not going to give you the exact number, but a number of conversations directly with Premier Holt. We also recognize they were a new government. And again, congratulations to her. And we are working closely with them, as we have been with Newfoundland and Labrador, with Ontario, with PEI. And the point that we have been making is that this is a really positive measure.
So I'm starting to feel like this is, well, we've ripped up the agreement. We've ripped up the agreement. We've ripped up the agreement.
Yeah, it's telling Canadians what the Liberals want them to believe, and the reality is actually something very different.
This is a very positive measure. This is a positive measure. This is a very positive measure.
We want you to think it's a positive measure so that you'll vote for us in the upcoming election. That's what I'm hearing.
The question was, how much is this going to cost New Brunswick? That's what the question is. And every single province should be having the same question to the government. How much is this going to be costing my province? And it's not a surprise, but it's, again, infuriating. And it's just illustrating the incompetence of this government. They don't know. They have not done those calculations because they don't care.
Right.
Like, they literally don't care how much this is going to cost the provinces. They've done the calculations to how much it's going to cost federal government, but they have no idea how much it's going to cost New Brunswick. They have no idea how much it's going to cost Northwest Territory. Well, Northwest Territories isn't going to cost anything because they don't have a harmonized sales tax.
Ontario.
But Ontario, PEI, places like that. No idea.
I bet that when they introduced this GST tax holiday, that they didn't even think about the provinces that have a harmonized sales tax.
Oh, probably.
Like, the thought never crossed their minds.
Probably because they kept just calling it the GST tax.
Right.
All the time.
Right. And meanwhile, almost half of the provinces have a harmonized sales tax.
For Canadians from coast to coast to coast. It is good for people in Ontario. It's good for people in Newfoundland and Labrador. It's good for people in New Brunswick. One of the things that we know that the newly elected Premier of New Brunswick has been focused on, as have all the premiers, is affordability for people in their provinces. This is a measure that gets directly at that. So we are certainly encouraging our provincial partners to recognize the value this gives the people in their province and to join us in saying, you know what, I'm going to join the federal government in offering this cut. And we've seen, for example, Premier Fury in Newfoundland and Labrador proactively doing that. We've seen the same thing in Ontario. We've seen the same thing in PEI. I think that's the right thing to do for the people of New Brunswick.
So no argument that Premier Holt has certainly been focused on affordability. But what I'm really looking for is that number. She has suggested $62 million shortfall. Would you agree with that number?
What I would say is we think the best approach to take, and it is one that we have seen from a number of provinces, is for the province to say, is this a good measure for the people in my province? Do I want to join the federal government in offering this to the people of my province?
Freeland, who do you think you're talking to? You're talking to senators that are going to be voting on this.
She thinks that they'll just think this is some wonderful, amazing thing for the people of Canada, and surely they'll vote for it. Why would they vote against it? Why are they even asking questions? Like, this should be so obvious, right?
Like, the lady said, how much is this going to cost New Brunswick? And then, Freeland goes through this long drawn out answer. Congratulations to the Premier. They're Liberals. They're on our side, blah, 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 and all this crap. Yeah, that's great, Freeland. How much is it going to cost? She says it's $63 million. Do you agree with that number? And the response is, this is a good idea.
We didn't ask whether it was a good idea. We asked how much it cost.
And we've been having those conversations, and I am confident that it's the right thing for the federal government to be contributing its share, and it's the right thing for provinces to be contributing their share.
I did take the opportunity to read the HST agreement between the Government of Canada and the Government of New Brunswick, and it talks about if the net provincial tax revenues of New Brunswick are reduced by more than 1%, the federal government would compensate for that. So I wonder if you can address that.
Again, my view is that given where the concerns of Canadians are on affordability, and given the fact that affordability is a challenge across the country from coast to coast to coast, the way we should be working on this in partnership with provinces is to say, let's step up together.
So,
Well, okay. She asked, the senator asked, if it's if this GST break takes more than 1% of the province's funding, you said you would cover it from the federal government. So what are you going to do about that? How much is that going to cost?
well, and then Freeland says, this is partnership. No, this doesn't sound like partnership at all, Freeland. It sounds like the federal government is trying to do something to save their own asses. And when the provinces are asking questions, the Liberals are saying, well, you should do it because it's a good thing. And, we should be stepping up together. And so what the federal government is saying is, we're not going to be paying you anything.
Listen, nobody likes paying taxes. But if having this HST break here in Ontario is going to affect things that we all use, like healthcare or schools for those of us who have school-age children, that's not a good thing. I would rather just pay the tax.
Well, and this is the problem, right? But it is so condescending, and this is to a province that is now a Liberal governing province. So if the federal Liberals are crapping on even their affiliated parties, like they're not the same party like the NDP is, but they're the same parties. Like, no wonder why all of these provincial parties are distancing themselves from the federal Liberals, because they're a complete dumpster fire.
Right, because again, remember, the federal Liberals are not the same party as the provincial Liberals in any province, but let's use New Brunswick because that's the example we're going with right now. They have generally the same values, like the same policies or similar policies, but they're not the same party.
And remember, the New Brunswick Liberals distance themselves from the federal Liberals in such a way that I don't even believe on the literature that they passed out, it even said Liberal on them. So that just goes to show you how bad the Liberal brand is.
At the beginning of your mandate, the government focused a lot on those people who were being left behind. Now the focus seems to be, as my colleagues have pointed out, more on middle-class Canadians. During discussions, there's been a focus on, we've done tax breaks for retirees, or breaks for retirees, for disabled people, families with children. That's all true and it's laudable. The cost of this measure far exceeds what the recommendation or the predicted cost would be of a guaranteed livable income for those who are in deep poverty and most challenged right now, including people with disabilities. What was the rationale for choosing to focus on the middle class rather than on those who are most in need?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Senator Pate, for your question. And I do want to recognize your lifetime of work supporting the most vulnerable in Canada. I would point out that our government actually in 2015, our sort of central campaign message was that we're going to deliver for the working class, or for the middle class, and that we're going to deliver for the middle class and those working hard to join it. I think that is a very good approach, and that approach continues to be at the heart of our government's work, to support middle-class Canadians and to support everyone who is working hard to join the middle class.
What a terrible answer. And she's not even done yet.
They've all been terrible answers. I mean, it's just been pumping up this GST holiday to a bunch of senators who really don't care that much. They want to get to the business of it. They don't care how the Liberals feel about it. They want to know, is this helping Canadians? Is this hurting businesses? What are the dollar signs? Like, what are the dollar figures? That's what they want to know. They don't care about how you feel about it, Freeland.
Well, and, you know, to Senator Plett's point on the interview that we did with him, this is actually one of the, I think, few advantages of having an appointed Senate rather than an elected Senate, because the senators sitting around the table here, doesn't matter how they're viewed by the public, right? It doesn't matter if they don't jump up and down and say that this GST holiday is the greatest thing since sliced bread, because they're not going to be facing an election in a year where they could potentially lose their seat. So there's no motivation for them to do that.
Yeah, there's like no partisanship. They don't really care whether Freeland thinks this is a good idea or not. They care, is this actually a good idea? Is it a good idea for Canadians? Is it a good idea for businesses? Is it a good idea for Canada's bottom line?
And just to note, none of the senators that have asked questions yet have been appointed by Stephen Harper. These are all Trudeau appointed senators. Just to note that. And you can tell Freeland's uncomfortable because she's saying, oh, well, you know, just want to point out that, you know, yay to the Liberal premier of New Brunswick. Good to see a Liberal, you know, woman premier. And then this lady, oh, you know, I'm going to suck up to you, you know, want to recognize your lifetime. Freeland, she doesn't care.
That's not why you're here.
She doesn't care that you're sucking up to her, but that she's asking, why are you prioritizing the middle class here versus, you know, Canadians that actually, you know, need the help? And Freeland's response to that, folks, is, well, we're focused on the middle class, meaning we don't give a crap about everybody else. Meanwhile, they've destroyed the middle class, so who are you helping? Like,
businesses, that's who they're helping. They're helping businesses and restaurants.
This is something else.
And I do think that, of course, there is a need for targeted measures to support the very most vulnerable. Those are the people who need the greatest support, and that is why there is, you know, such a series of measures we've put in place for them, whether it is dental care, whether it is pharmacare, whether it is the Canada Workers Benefit, whether it is the Canada Child Benefit targeted at the families that need it the most. There's a lot of support there, and it is a good thing that that support is there. I think at the same time, there is room for, and indeed a need for, measures that cover all Canadians. And I'll give you 3 examples. This measure is certainly one, supporting everyone who, you know, on the way home from work wants to pick up a rotisserie chicken, and this measure makes it a little more affordable. Another example is early learning and childcare. It was an intentional choice of our government to begin the work of putting in place a national system of early learning and childcare that would be available to everyone, because I really believe that that is the way you build a program that will have enduring national support. And I would say the same thing about Medicare, a universal single-payer healthcare system that we have in Canada that we've invested $200 billion in. That's not means tested. That's available for every single Canadian. And I think that's a good use of our money. So I think that we need to have measures that support all Canadians, that are there for the middle class. And then we also need measures that are targeted at people who need the most support. I think you need to do both.
Right. I don't disagree that you've put in place some incredible measures, and as you know, many of us have been supportive of those. It's the issue of talking about those who are working hard to achieve middle class or to be part of the middle class. There's abundant evidence now, and I recommend to you Dr. Zhao's work out of UBC, that demonstrates very clearly that when you're in deep poverty, it actually affects your cognitive capacity to not just work hard, to actually even envision that you can achieve those. So it underscores the need to provide those kinds of income-tested, not necessarily moralistic or judgmental approaches to assisting those in deepest poverty. What analysis of those kinds of measures have been undertaken?
So, ladies and gentlemen, that was a dressing down of Chrystia Freeland.
Well, yeah, because she was just going on about, look at all this great stuff that the Liberals have done. Look at us, look at us.
Yeah, and meanwhile, this lady is like, so you obviously know nothing about this. I would encourage you to go and, read the literature of this person about this, and then proceeds to lecture her on some of the stuff. Now, whether you believe this or not is irrelevant. The point to take away from here is this is a Liberal appointed senator dressing down the Liberal Minister of Finance.